welcome back to Fern Cottage. This is our second tour. We're mid-June now. We had hoped to do one in May, but we just ended up being very busy. I thought I'd start here with the peas because they're looking fantastic. They've got bumblebees all over them. They're looking really lush and healthy. We grow our peas and beans here on these towers. We make these out of just some sheep wire fencing. We've had these a few years now, so they're really great because you can use them again and again. It's a fairly cheap thing to make them out of. We did used to do some willow obelisks, and I still use those in the yard because they look really nice, but you have to replace them really every year. And also, as the peas grow upwards, they have a lot of the bulk, and the peas start to flower at about 1 metre high. And then all the fruit is up here, and on the obelisks that come together, that means that you're bringing a lot into a very small space on some of the willow obelisks. They're all right for the shorter varieties, but taller varieties like this, it just doesn't work very well. Whereas you can see here, particularly at the back, that you can get a lot of height out of these, and they're very sturdy, and the peas cling to them as well. I've only had to tie them in once so far, and I'm just tying them in again now because we forecast some heavy rain tomorrow. I don't want them to get smashed off the sides, but they, you can see they're clinging quite well here. The varieties that we've used here, this one's a Latvian soup pea, so we use that one to stay on the plant and dry and save the seed for using in soups and stews, but they are actually also really tasty, so you can eat them straight out of the pod fresh off the plant as well, so they're quite a nice multi-purpose one. At the back here, the white one, we've got Boddington soup pea as well, which is really nice in the same way, just as pods. Here we've got one of my favourites as well, Champion of England, and these are all really tall varieties. They grow very tall. We've got problems with our light here with being on a northwest facing slope. A lot of our sun is kind of higher up rather than low down, so we grow these tall varieties so we can make best use of the light levels up here. But also we've started, since last year, we trialled growing a lower variety, some of the more modern varieties that grow up to about 75 centimetres, 1 metre high, and they can grow. You can actually plant them on the same trellising as these taller peas, because the tall peas, the leaves die off and they don't actually produce any peas till about 1 metre tall, so in a way you've got all of that wasted space. So if you grow a shorter variety of pea in there at the same time, you can maximise the use of the space and have peas all the way up. This is the conservatory. In here, this planter, we've got 2 plants in. So at the front we've got a shorter, bushier determinate variety, so that will tend to crop earlier but finish sooner. Then at the back here we've got an indeterminate variety, so that will keep growing upwards and will fruit over a longer period of time. And we've got them on strings here, and we're just gently twisting it round so that it will keep going up this string. These raised beds have done really well. We've got quite a lot going on in here. I've still got a lot of work to do. I've got carrots to thin out and the parsnips. Unfortunately, I think the weather's just been too hot for the spinach, so I'm just going to pull those out because they're just taking up space now, and we'll just make use of what leaves we can, but they've just started to go to seed, so they're not much use anymore. We don't really like to grow in raised beds because they tend to dry out a bit more than mounded beds, and you get slugs and things living down the edges and coming out and eating your plants at night. But here it's worked really well for us because the soil was really shallow, very hard and compacted, very rubbly, So to be able to build these raised beds here has meant that we can grow really good crops this first year that we've had them. So we managed to get these 2 in. We ran out of thyme and compost for the 3rd bed, so I've just dug some pits and planted some courgettes over there, and I'll be mulching round those with some cut grass just to stop the soil from drying out and stop any weeds from germinating. So it's still very much a work in progress in the back garden, but it's certainly been really great to see in year 1 that we've managed to grow so much. So we'll be harvesting some things here soon. We're in the yard now, again at the yard polyculture. This is a white Camassia here. This is Camassia Licklinii alba. There was some blue ones over here in the last video. They've finished flowering now, and these white ones are looking spectacular, and as you can see, really attracting a lot of insects. I've also got these thalictrums over here, and they're just about going over, but they have been looking fantastic, and they're just great because they're just sticking up through other things here, like the rosemary, and also over here coming up through this apple tree. So they're not really creating much shade at all. They're a very delicate flower, but they're just poking through, and once these have gone over, I'll cut them down just below where the apple tree branches are, and then the apple tree will get all the light and let the fruit ripen. So just a couple of flowers that are looking really great at the moment. The pumpkins are really romping away now. We direct sowed a couple earlier in the year, but we did find that some of the varieties were just really slow. We had a couple of really cold spells in late May, and some of the varieties really suffered. So a few of these were direct sown, and a few were varieties that we'd planted at the same time as we direct sown, but we'd put in the greenhouse. So it was interesting to see which ones did well and which didn't. These ropes have gone in now that we talked about before, and as the pumpkins grow, as with the tomatoes, we just wind them round, and that's how they get supported to grow upwards, as you can see there. And the ropes they're not attached to anything at the bottom, they're just loosely looped round there, but they support that fine. And so our next step will be to put some ropes from this frame here going across the yard, so that as they go up they can go outwards, and make the most of the vertical space here, and really later on in the year you won't be able to see this wall because of pumpkins. I love this delphinium here. It's looking absolutely fantastic. Really just starting to flower now, growing up through this pear. This pear here is really laden in fruit, so I'll have to hope it doesn't lose too much this year. with it being such dry weather. We've had to water it occasionally during the drought, but it's looking pretty good. There's the clematis as well, which is flowering. That grows up through the pear and just looks really pretty and adds to this polyculture here. I didn't manage to get as many edible plants in here as I'd wanted earlier in the year, with it being so dry for May, most of May and a bit of June. The soil was too hard and it just would have required too much extra watering. But I have sown some bush beans, so I'll be putting those in here, and that'll take up some of the spaces that are left, especially when I cut some things back, like this Turkish rocket. We've been eating these flowers in salads, and the kids like to come out and pick them. It's got a lovely smell, just like honey. So once I cut those back, then there'll be a bit more space and I can finally get the planting done that I wanted to in here. I managed to take out most of the mint. I've just left a little clump for using in the kitchen down here. We've got tons up in the forest garden for if we're wanting to make any mint jellies or anything like that, but I've just left this little clump here for when we're cooking. The kale in the yard has hardly had any caterpillar damage whatsoever. We keep seeing the odd caterpillar, but the yard is absolutely full of birds, and I think this is why we've really not had any problems at all this year with the kale being eaten. And it's just fantastic because the leaves are still looking really good, really edible, and there's only the odd one that's had a little bit of a nibble around the edge, probably before it was seen by a bird, and then it's been picked off. So the yard really is working really well for wildlife, and the wildlife are helping us out as well with our pest problems. We're growing our own seed potatoes. We've been doing this for quite a few years now. We grow them in these pots, so they're not in garden soil, they're in compost, so there's less chance of any diseases. We can grow our own seed potatoes like this because we have bred our own varieties which are really resistant to blight. But you know, potatoes will, even the blight resistant ones, will inevitably get some blight at some point. So when that happens, we'll cut the foliage right back so that the blight won't get into the tubers. Here we've got our variety that we have named A, very exciting name, and this one here is called J. So these seed potatoes will be for our crop next year. We'll store those inside in bags away from the ones that we dig up from the vegetable garden for eating. So these will be stored separately so that they don't get any diseases or anything passed on from the soil on the other potatoes. Nettles are really overtaking here, but it doesn't matter for this tree, so we just leave those because they're so good for wildlife. You can see that the grafts have taken really well, plenty of healthy growth on here. Normally you'd take this off now so you don't strangulate the tree. We have in the past accidentally left them on for a whole year and it hasn't really mattered, but ideally that would come off soon. You want to take off the suckers, any suckers that start growing, so they don't end up taking over and taking the energy out of the tree. Now we're going to go and look at the pears that we grafted onto the mature hawthorns just to see how that's going. So we cut the top off this mature hawthorn, and then we've done a cleft graft of pear onto that. We've nipped out the shoots here, some of the shoots, and just left this one strong leader here. So we'll keep these, but we don't want them to take over as the leader, so we'll just keep this one here as a strong leader. We've mulched this mown grass here just to stop any of the other grass from swamping them, as this one is so close to the ground, whereas the apple we grafted quite high up, this one is worked quite low down, so we have just mulched until this gets a bit stronger, and then once it's a bigger tree we'll let the nettles grow up around that as well, and it won't matter. The josterberry is covered in fruit. It's not ripe yet. It'll go sort of deep purple when it's ready, but it just shows how much fruit you can get from a plant where we've done basically no maintenance whatsoever. The only pest control we have up here is the birds. The gooseberry is laden with fruit, absolutely groaning to the point where the branches are on the floor. This is not quite ripe either, but as you can see, we've had no problems with gooseberry sawfly or mildew or anything like that. It's a really healthy looking bush, and once we've picked the fruit, the branches will just ping straight back up again.